that one word or two words?
Two words.
Two words of Ukrainian. I am ashamed that I cannot speak more Ukrainian.
No.
This is not going to last. Please don't watch these while I'm speaking. I can tell you it makes me very angry. I will come and kill somebody if I see them when I'm talking and they go, so please don't. Last year I talked, as you know, about lockdown. You can hear me all right at the back, can you? Can you hear me okay? Good. In a way, that was a very simple subject. Today is a bit more complicated. So I know you all speak wonderful English, so I will speak quite slowly, and I will try and make it as clear as I can. As you know, the text is going to appear over there, but I'd rather you listen to me than try and follow the text. As that wonderful lady who introduced me said, my object this morning is to provoke you. So I don't want to give my talk and then see you all sitting like this. I would like you to ask me lots of questions, particularly because the subject I'm going to talk about is very complicated. So I'm warning you in advance. As it says, I chose as the title, in the beginning was the Word. Now you all know where that comes from. It's the first thing in the Bible. But it is a most extraordinary statement when you think. In the beginning was the Word. So the first question is, what is the meaning of that word, word? In particular, the way it is used by politicians, by everyday conversation, and more importantly, in the way it is abused today, not used properly. Now, let's start, therefore, with its use in literature. Now, by literature, I mean novels, poems, polemic, political speeches, reviews, criticism. What is its use in language? And that will take us quite quickly into an even bigger question, which is, what is the meaning and function of art? All art. Any art. It's a simple question. It's not asked as often as it should be. And there is a very complicated answer. Like the best questions. Simple question, will you marry me? The answer, very complicated usually. So to help me, I'm going to talk about three great works of literature, which I think you've been warned about in advance. The first is this one. It's called Last Witnesses, and it's by your very own Svetlana Alexievich, who, although she was brought up in Belarusia, was in fact born near Lviv. And she's the only one of two Nobel Prize winners who's listed as Ukrainian. So that's rather important. Second is a short story by Joseph Conrad called Youth, who was also born near Lviv, and then in Poland, but he wrote in English, and he's generally considered to be one of the most influential and important novelists in the whole of English language. A Pole born in Lviv. It's extraordinary, but true. And he was also nominated for the Nobel Prize in Literature, but unfortunately he died between the time that he was voted and the time it was announced, and you can't award a Nobel Prize in retrospect. So he never got it, but he deserved it. And the third is this, which is called The Anthem for Doomed Youth by Wilfred Owen, who was a poet in England in the First World War, and he was killed only a few days, literally a few days, before the end of the war, the armistice in 1918. But is now thought of as one of the greatest poets in the English language at that time, and probably one of the greatest poets who ever wrote in English, and especially in the 20th century. Now, the title of the Anthem of Doom Youth, in a way, gives us a clue to what we're going to talk about. Because there is well, there are many extraordinary poems, but there's one really strange poem, which is called Strange Meeting, which will be the basis of my discussion about him. Now, for many English people, indeed for all lovers of 20th century art and culture around the world, including Russia, Owen's poetry is absolutely essential reading because it forms the backbone of arguably one of the most important musical requiems ever written. Definitely to be compared with Mozart or Verdi. The war requiem, I mentioned more about that in a moment. But Britain took a line from this poetry as his clue to this music, which is, "My subject is war," Owen wrote, "and the pity of war." The poetry is in the pity. So all the poet can do is warn. And that's really what all these three books are about. So what then is the function of books like that, of such literature? Function. Why is it there? In a way, as I said, the quotation from Owen gives us a clue. Now, of course, some people argue, especially in the old Soviet Union, which mercifully I never had to endure, that the sole function, the main function of any art, particularly literature and music, is to serve the state, either to glorify it or to celebrate its great achievements. And the story of Shostakovich, for example, which I know personally very, very well, and his increasingly desperate attempts not to offend that monster, Stalin, and yet remain true to himself, is one of the most fascinating studies in the whole of 20th century art. Now, I'm sure Shostakovich would be very offended to be described as a case study. But his famous subtitle for his Fifth Symphony, after the Fourth Symphony had been effectively banned, withdrawn, banned, was he wrote, we thought he wrote, the Fifth Symphony was a true artist's response to just criticism. In other words, the artist, I accept, I did wrong, I've been told off by Stalin, I'm very sorry, I apologize. And it seems to be extraordinary when we remember that this happened at the same time as possibly his most famous instance of being banned, which was that he wrote an opera called Lady Macbeth, in a sense, which Pravda denounced and said it was just noise, it wasn't music, it was bourgeois, it was coarse, it was vulgar. Only in the last 10 years have we now realized that Shostakovich never wrote this symphony. This symphony was a just response to... They invented it. The KGB invented it. Or whatever it was, Ogpu invented it and wrote it on because they thought it was necessary that we, the state, control what art is made. So if we tell a composer he's done wrong, we can make sure he apologizes. So we'll put it on top of his symphony. Shostakovich never said it was a lie. Incidentally, when I was doing some research for this, I discovered that Stalin executed 1,500 writers. 1,500. I know you had terrible problems in Ukraine with the Golomodor, you know what I mean. But 1,500 writers, what for? What did they do? That was what the Soviet authorities perceived as the threat of language, With language, you can change things. Can't have that, kill them. Terrible. Now, I'm extremely aware that all art, music, literature, painting, even poetry, is always dependent upon patrons. You know, you need the money. So, whether from the church, without St. Mark's Cathedral in Venice, there would have been no Monteverdi, the great Italian composer. Without Pope Julius II, it's possible, there would have been no Michelangelo, no Sistine Chapel. Without Emperor Joseph II in Vienna, it's possible that there would have been no Marriage of Figaro of Mozart. So the fact that there is a patron is not necessarily a bad thing. Even Benjamin Britten, who we referred to in the 20th century, depended for his first great masterpiece, an opera called Peter Grimes, on the generosity of his paymaster, Sergei Kuzovitsky. And Rachmaninoff, even, after he fled from the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917, settled in the United States, he was paid for and given a piano by Steinway. So they paid for him to be there. So the main question is, does this dependency on patronage necessarily limit the ambition of the creator? That's the really crucial thing. If I'm paying you to write a poem or paint a painting or write a piece of music, am I imposing limitations on your... If you've got something to say, please say it. Or listen, or leave. I don't mind which. Clear? Looking at you. Yes, you. So the question really is, as I said, does this dependency on patronage, the fact that you need someone to pay for it, restrict what you do as a creative person? Or is it the wish of the person who is creating something to say something about himself or of the world in which he or she lives, something that may be unpleasant to the person who's paid for it, but nonetheless needs saying? And more importantly, since we're talking about language, what language do you use? You know, do you openly say, you're a monster, you're paying for my work, but you're still a monster? Or do you find a more polite way of saying it? I don't know. But the language that you use to talk to people is absolutely crucial. Language is crucial. You know, if I'm going to propose marriage to somebody, and there are many people here I absolutely definitely want to propose marriage to, you know, the words I use, the language I use, will maybe help her to say yes. Or maybe make sure that she says no. I don't know. But the language is what is crucial. The important thing with language, again, is to say something which is simple, plain, and can be easily understood. Definitely not be misunderstood. Which goes back to the abuse of language again. Or, I suggest this as an alternative, is language itself somehow a coded way that one generation talks to the next generation? That's really important. When we read a literature of the 19th century, are we really understanding what they are saying to us? Or are we just reading the words on the page? In other words, the words on the page are meant by the creator to say something else. The question is, what is the else? Now, in literature, which you know, or didn't know, I'm sure, Pasternak and Solzhenitsyn are wonderful examples of this, and Akhmatova. She gave voice, Anna Akhmatova, to thousands of women who were caught in the system, caught between hope and grief, whose sons had disappeared in the reign of terror. Have a look at her extraordinary poem, Requiem. and try and figure out what is it she's saying. She's not just writing about her son or her husband who disappeared, but she's telling us a universal truth about what happens when you say something and the state or government of anything says no and imposes you and stops it and censors it. Please read it if you haven't read it. So let's go back to the three works that I suggested to you. Now, they have in common, these three books, that they describe very clearly the world that they come from. But they are also profoundly relevant to the beliefs of the person who created them. So they each contain universal truths to which we absolutely must pay attention, because not to do so diminishes us as human beings. I mean, this is a very big subject, and I'm happy to talk about it afterwards, but I'm trying to get you to see that this is an enormous picture, but we have to think in particular terms, trying to come to terms with it. I just also want to remind you, because I'm constantly being reminded of it myself, that two of the most important phrases in late 20th century and certainly the 21st century, that you will know both of these phrases, in our language, the English language, but they translate, the two great phrases are crimes against humanity. Now, how many times have you heard that phrase recently? You hear it all the time, crimes against humanity. And the other word, which is really important, is genocide. How many times have you heard the word genocide? Even in the last week, you hear it all the time. Did you know that both of these phrases were invented, and I do mean invented, by people who came from Lviv? Two lawyers, one called Raphael Lemkin, and the other called Hersch Lauterbach. It was then Eastern Galicia, Lemberg, Lviv, Lvov. So you, in this area, are responsible for two of the most important phrases in all of contemporary language. Please be proud of that, and please don't forget it. So we go back to the three works. Last Witnesses by Svetlana Alexievich, Youth by Joseph Conrad, and Anthem Doomed Youth by Wilfred Owen. They're all concerned with one topic, interestingly enough, which is growing up, which we all spend our lives doing. The transition from childhood to maturity, and even death. Now, if we take this one first, during a 15-year period in the 1970s and the 1980s, Svetlana Alexievich collected over 100 eyewitness accounts from people who were children when the Nazis invaded in 1939 and 1940. It was first published in the Soviet Union, but it was published because, as she told me, it was very useful as an anti-German piece of propaganda, if you see what I mean. Not as great literature, but as anti-German propaganda. It's only just now, within the last 2 years, been published in the West, because it was banned. Her account is absolutely terrifying of what she tells you. That human beings can behave like they did. And these are eyewitness accounts by children, 10, 11, 12, 13, who saw what happened when the Germans arrived in their village. And she describes in great detail. And what's interesting is that the people who were children then are now chief executive of this oil company, chief executive of some television company. You know, they're now responsible, maybe even rectors of universities, for all I know. But what gives it power is that these are children talking about what happened. And she tells it, it's a moral tale, of course, she tells it with such immense power, which is the mark of all great literature. Great literature has at its core a sense of morality. They're telling us, the great writers, what's good, what's bad. Think of Solzhenitsyn, think of Pasternak again. And Svetlana Alexeyevich is exactly the same. No wonder the book won the Nobel Prize for Literature. She's been persecuted, this woman, still very much alive. I'm seeing her on Saturday, strangely enough. I mean, that's a wonderful irony. But she's been persecuted because her first book, which was called The Unwomanly Face of War, and it concerned what happened to Soviet women in the Soviet Union during World War II. And I can tell you it's extremely upsetting. Her second book, which has a wonderful title called Zinky Boys, I have no idea what Zinky means. Oh, I've read the book. And it's an account of what happened when the Soviet authorities invaded Afghanistan. Not a very popular subject if you think about it. And her most recent book, which affects Ukraine, of course, is called Voices from Chernobyl. And that offended absolutely everybody. Because what she did was she tracked down everybody who had survived when the nuclear power station blew up. But not just the people who survived, but the people who were sent into it to try and stop the contamination spreading, who effectively committed suicide. And she talked to their husbands, their sons, their children. Voices from Chernobyl. Now, you can imagine the reaction to that. It means that she's almost never been published in Belarus, hardly ever published here in Ukraine, and disgraced in Russia. When she won the Nobel Prize, the Soviet authorities, I think some gangster called Putin, issued a statement saying this was an unworthy winner of the Nobel Prize. Yet again, exactly the same as what happened when you remember with Pasternak, what happened to Solzhenitsyn, happened to her again. But this is 3-4 years ago. It's still going on. She said in the Nobel, you make a speech when you win the Nobel Prize. And she said had a very interesting thought, many interesting thoughts, one in particular. She said, in Soviet times, we were fighting a dragon, a big idea, a dragon. We were great, we were beautiful, we were unified. It's a bit like Hong Kong now and China. You know, we had something to fight against. Then all of a sudden, we learned that today we're living, quoting her exactly, we're living with rats. Rats. They're small. They appear everywhere. We haven't got any experience of dealing with that kind of threat. Not in literature, particularly not in literature, but also not in our private lives. We have no experience of fighting small evil, even when it masquerades as government policy. Now, I'm going to read you just one example of what is in here. As I said, there are many, many, many eyewitness accounts, but this one will give you a taste. It's the testimony of a little girl called Fina Lyusko, who now runs a film company, appropriately enough. But she was 15 when this happened. And this is straight out of the book. I remember, says Fina, that the death squads, this is in 1939, I think. I remember that the death squads were all black, with tall caps. Even their dogs were black, shiny. We clung to our mothers. They didn't kill everybody, not the whole village. They took those who stood on the right, and I was on the right with my mother, Mama. We were separated. Children here, parents there. And we understood, said the 15-year-old Fina, we understood that they were about to execute the parents and leave us, children, alone. Mama was over there. I said, I don't want to live without Mama. I asked to stay with her, and I cried. For some reason, she said, they let me through to join Mama. As soon as the mother saw her, she said, "Oh, that's not my daughter." And I'm saying, "Mama dear, Mama, Mama, that's not my daughter, not my daughter. Mama, Mama." Her eyes weren't filling with tears, but they were filling with blood. Eyes full of blood. When she said, "That is not my daughter," because that was the only way that she thought she could save her. They dragged me away somehow. But what I saw was that soldiers, they first shot the children. They shot them to see how the parents would react. My 2 sisters and my 2 brothers were shot. Once the children were shot, they began to kill the parents. And I didn't see my mama anymore. Mama probably fell down. What I did see was a woman who was holding a young baby in her arms. He was sucking at a little bottle of water. They first shot the bottle, then they shot the baby, and only after that did they kill the mother. Fine as I'm surprised that I can live at all after that. I survived as a child, but how do I live as a grown-up? Now, that's an incredible story. And there's 150 stories like that in here. Eyewitness accounts of people younger than you. Go to Joseph Conrad. Joseph Conrad was born in, forgive me if I mispronounce it, Berdichev in the Shytomyr Oblast?
Zhytomyr.
I believe. Northern Ukraine, 100 or so kilometers from here. He wrote 20 novels, beginning with a book called Alameda's Folly in 1895, and concluded with a novel called Suspense in 1925. And perhaps the most famous story is called Heart of Darkness, which was published in 1899 and later used by Francis Coppola as the basis of his film Apocalypse Now. But Youth, short story from which I will quote, was published in 1902. Now, Conrad is interesting for all kinds of reasons. He was a man of 3 different cultures. He was Polish, French, and English. He was brought up, obviously, by a Polish family, but he learned French as his first language as a child. And at the age of only 17, he moved to France to serve for 15 years in the French merchant navy, where he eventually rose to the position of a captain. Now, at school, he must have learned German as well, but French remained the language that he spoke with greatest fluency, apparently with no foreign accent, right until the end of his life. So he knew about French history and he knew about French literature. And French novelists were, in a sense, his model. But he wrote in English, the tongue, be encouraged by this, that he did not learn to speak until he was 20 years old. So there's hope for everybody, including me. But he was an English writer who grew up with a completely different cultural background and was acknowledged before he died as one of the greatest of all writers in the English language. And I mentioned he was due to be awarded the Nobel Prize, but he died sadly. Now, Youth, like all his stories, most of his stories, all his stories really, is at first sight just a tale of the sea. He'd been a captain on a boat for many, many years. So, and the part of the world that he knew best was what we now call the South China Sea, around Indonesia and Singapore. But that's its background. But the subject matter is quite different. Youth tells the story of a young man's first voyage to the East. A second mate, that's a kind of low run down, on board an old merchant ship called the Judea. He says, and this to me has always struck me as being the perfect example of what we all feel at a certain point in our lives. Oh, youth, he says, the strength of it, the faith of it, the imagination of it. And he says, to me, the old boat, that's the boat he's on, the Judea, was not what you might describe an old cattle trap, I mean a kind of junk steamer, carting around the world a lot of old coal. For me, she was an endeavour, a test, the trial of life. That's the direction I'm going in. I think of her with pleasure, says Conrad, with affection, with regret, as you would think of someone who is now dead, but you have always loved. I shall never forget her, he says. In other words, the boat represented for him the dream of youth. That's what we all want to do. We all want to become president, captains of industry, get married and have 10 children, or whatever our ambitions are. Youth, that's something really exciting to look forward to. Unfortunately, in the novel, near the coast of Western Australia, they had many problems. And the cargo, which was coal, it just spontaneously lit up because it was so hot. The crew, as he describes it, they attempt to stop the fire, but they can't make the hull out the frame of the boat watertight. They attempt to flood the fire by pouring water into it. That doesn't work. And then 100 or so miles off the coast of Java, the island of Java, the gas from the coal blew up, and our hero, who's called Marlowe, probably Conrad himself, is thrown into the air and comes tumbling back down onto the deck. So the optimism of his youth, everything that he dreamt would happen to him, has been shattered in that one experience. But he sticks with it, does Marlowe, because he has an affection for the captain, who is old, a bit like me, and it's his first voyage in command. So he feels very passionate about this captain. He wants to support the captain. Even though he knows the captain is making lots of mistakes. So what had begun for Marlowe, a young ship's officer fascinated by the air of adventure and romance in the exotic East, becomes a tale of terrible disillusionment with life and what it has to offer. So at the end of the book, remembering all this, Marlowe, Conrad, says, now our faces are marked by toil, by deceptions, always looking still for something out of life, that while it is expected, is already gone, has passed unseen, in a sigh, in a flash, together with the youth, with the strength, and the romance of illusions. In other words, as you get old, all of your dreams and optimism slowly but surely disappear. And it's difficult, it becomes increasingly difficult to go on being optimistic in the way that you were when you were your age. I mean, I often say to people, I wish I could have 20 years back. I'd actually like 40 years back. So I'd be your age and looking forward to things. Instead of it, although I still look forward to some things, most of my life is thinking, what did I do wrong? What did I miss? Lost opportunities, disappointments, disillusionment. Not just love affairs, but everything. Now, Bertrand Russell, one of the greatest mathematicians and philosophers of the 20th century, he wrote in his autobiography, published over half a century after Conrad died, of his impressions of meeting Conrad in 1910. And don't forget, Youth was written in 1902. My first impression, says Russell, was one of surprise. He, Conrad, spoke English with a very strong foreign accent. And nothing in his demeanour, that's the way he dressed, the way he looked, in any way suggested that he'd ever been a sea captain. He was an aristocratic Polish gentleman to his fingertips. At our very first meeting, we talked with continually increasing intimacy. We seemed to go through layer after layer of what was superficial, till gradually we both reached the central fire, says Russell. It was an experience, says Russell, don't forget, one of the great philosophers of the 20th century. It was an experience unlike anything I've ever known. We looked into each other's eyes, half appalled, half intoxicated to find ourselves in such a region. The emotion was as intense as passionate love, and as at the same time all-embracing. I came away, said Russell, bewildered, confused, hardly able to find my way amongst ordinary affairs, ordinary life. I couldn't go back to ordinary life. I'd stared into this prophet, this visionary's eyes, and he'd left me completely shocked. It was his eyes, but it was also what he'd written, the literature that he'd written, that Russell knew. There is no morality. Conrad summed up his own beliefs as follows. This is pretty terrible, a warning. Faith, by that he meant religious faith, or faith in other people, or faith in humanity, or faith in just loving people. Faith is a myth, and beliefs shift like mists on the shore. Thoughts vanish. Words, once pronounced, die. And the memory of yesterday is as shadowy as the hope of tomorrow. In this world, as I have known it, we are made to suffer without the shadow of a reason, of a cause or guilt. There is no morality, says Conrad, no knowledge and no hope. There is only consciousness of ourselves which drives us about in a world that is always a vain and fleeting experience. A moment, a twinkling of an eye, and then nothing remains but a clod of mud, of cold mud, dead mud, cast into a black space, rolling around an extinguished sun. Nothing, neither thought, nor sound, nor soul, nothing. But Conrad, as an artist, as a great novelist, wanted something else. As he said in preface to another novel called The Nigger of the Narcissus, we are allowed to say nigger, 1897, he said, I want to make you hear. I want to make you feel. Before all, I want to make you see through language. That and no more, because it is everything. And if I succeed through language, you will find there everything according to your wishes, deserts, encouragement, consolation, fear, charm, all you demand. And perhaps only that glimpse of the truth for which you have forgotten to ask. And I wish to do this by the power of the written word through the power of language. Keep coming back to the same subject. Now my third example is the First World War poet Wilfred Owen. He was born in 1893 in Shropshire, in England, which is on the border of Wales, and he fought as an officer in the trenches, a soldier in the trenches of Flanders. He was severely wounded, and as a result he was awarded the Military Cross. That's the highest decoration that you can get. But after recovery, after recovery, he went back to the trenches, and he was killed 6 days before the final armistice in November 1918, and he was only 25. Most of his poetry was not published until after his death. It attracted very little attention until Benjamin Britten, as I mentioned, included 10 of his poems in this great work, The War Requiem, which is without question one of the most important choral works of the 20th century. It's interesting, in 2013, I mean, this is a huge piece of music, huge choir, huge orchestra, soloists, boys' choir, everything. In 2013, there were over 300 performances of this work around the world, including in Kiev, interestingly enough. Now, Owen's importance as a poet lies in his unswerving description of war. In other words, he never looked away, war straight in the face, which he thought was vile, evil, wasteful, and in the end, absolutely unforgivable. As I said before, his epitaph was, "My subject is war, and the pity of war. Poetry is in the pity. All the poet can do is war." But how does he do this? How does he war? He's just a poet, for God's sake. He's not a politician. How does he do this? Well, he does it by mobilizing the power of language. Now, this is in complete contrast to the writers who then and still glorify the patriotic fight. God is on our side. You know it, I'm sure. It's a wonderful little poem I found. The First World War, boys, it came and went. It came and it went. The reason for fighting I never did get, but I learned to accept it with pride, because you don't count the dead when God is on your side. Now, I mean, that's the complete opposite of everything that Wilfred Owen stood for. I mean, Trotsky thought that. Trotsky thought that was exactly Trotsky's philosophy, murderous though he was, although he substituted proletariat for God. As long as the proletariat is on our side, it's all going to be all right. Be all right on the night. Owen's use of language is completely different, as you would expect, and it's so particular that you can almost hear the sound of the guns. I just quote one part of one poem, one of the most famous poems. "What passing bells for those who die as cattle? Only the monstrous anger of the guns, only the stuttering rifles' rapid rattle can patter out their hasty orisons. No mockeries now for them, no prayers nor bells, nor any voice of mourning, save the choirs, the shrill, demented choirs of wailing shells, and the bugles calling from sad shires. What candles may be held to speed them all? Not in the hands of boys. Don't get the children who were fighting the First World War. Not in the hands of boys, but in their eyes shall shine the holy glimmers of goodbyes. The pallor of girls' brides shall be their pall, their flowers and tenderness of patient minds, and each slow dusk a drawing down of blinds." Now, there's no question that that's poetic in a traditional sense. It uses images like candles and bells, dusk and choirs and bugles calling, flowers, tenderness. But in other ways, it's an absolutely terrifying depiction of slaughter. Just compare that with another poet who wrote exactly the same time. The God of battles shall judge the foe, who trampled our country and laid her low. God, hold our hands on the reckoning day, lest all we owe them we should repay. What was that woman talking about? Another poem of Owen, which in a way is even more extraordinary, tells a familiar story of Abraham and Isaac, which you all know. But instead of God intervening to stop Abraham sacrificing his son and killing the lamb instead, Owen is not having any of that. His poem goes as following. And remember the last three lines. So Abraham rose and clave the wood, cut the wood, and stretched forth the knife to slay his son, when lo, an angel called him out of heaven, saying, Lay not thy hand upon the lad, neither do anything to him. Behold, a ram caught in the thicket by his horns. Offer the ram of pride instead. But the old man would not so, and slew his son, and half the seed of Europe, one by one. So in the end, what have these three great writers, Alexander, Conrad, really got in common? What have they got to tell us? Firstly, they observe without sentimentality. They don't instruct or comment. They tell us about themselves, but they're also witnesses to what happened to them. And they translate these observations into something universal, something which applies to all of us. And ironically, it was a fourth great writer, I haven't mentioned before, the black American writer Toni Morrison, who died last August, who really also spelled out the connection in her acceptance speech for the 1993 Nobel Prize for Literature. I want you, even those who are not paying attention and still talking amongst yourselves, I really want you to treasure these words. Put them on your wall. Recite them in your sleep. Tell them to all those obscene politicians, from Trump to Putin, who constantly debase our language and threaten our freedoms with meaningless rhetoric. Toni Morrison emphasized over and over again the importance of language, not its misuse, but its glory, and above all, its moral imperative. Something which Svetlana Alexievich, Joseph Conrad, and Wilfred Owen knew too well and wrote about. Language, Toni Morrison said, is used to keep citizens armed and arming, slaughtered and slaughtering. Diplomatic language is used to countenance rape, torture, and assassination. Just read any speech by Putin, any speech by Trump, and you'll see that as proof, absolute proof. But she concludes by saying, we die, we all die. That may be the meaning of our life, but we do language, and that is the measure of our lives. I shall wait for your questions.
Thank you.
I'm just going to add one thing. I couldn't see how to include it, but it's quite interesting. Coming on the plane here, I read this little book about the problems between Palestine and Israel. Now, what I'm about to tell you is not anti-Israeli, anti-Semitic, nor is it necessarily pro-Palestinian, but it is a terrifying insight into what has gone wrong. These are people who have, over the last 30, 40 years, in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, misused language and misused their power and their authority. They are President Moshe Katsav, who was convicted of rape and obstruction of justice. He was president of Israel. Prime Minister Ehud Olmert, he was convicted of breach of trust and bribery, sent to prison. He was a prime minister. Aaron Abu Haitzera, who was the Minister of Religious Services, he was sent to prison for larceny, breach of trust, and fraud. Shlomo Ben-Itziri, who was the Minister of Health and Labour and Social Welfare, he was sent to prison for bribes, breach of faith, obstructing justice, etc. Ari Deri, who was the Minister of Internal Affairs, he was sent to prison for bribery. I don't know how to pronounce his name, Chachi Hanageli, who was the Minister of Justice, appropriately enough, the Minister of Internal Affairs, he was sent to prison for perjury and, wonderful phrase, moral turpitude. Avram Hershon, who was the Israeli Minister of Finance, he was sent to prison for theft of 2 million shekels. Yitzhak Mordecai, who was the Israeli Minister of Defense, Minister of Transport, he was sent to prison for sexual harassment. Raphael Pinhasi, Minister of Communications, he was sent to prison for illegal transfer of funds, and so on and so on. The best one is Golan Segev, who was the National Infrastructure Minister for Infrastructure. He was sent to prison for drug smuggling, forgery, and fraud. Now, that's half the politicians of Israel in the last 50 years who spoke words of truth every time they arrived at some negotiation with the Palestinians, but they were all corrupt, like the President Benjamin Netanyahu, who deserves to be sent to prison. But they are people who are speaking words which we believe because they are prime ministers or minister of this or minister of that. Don't trust the bastards. Be warned. These people are not telling you the truth because they don't understand the power of language, or they only understand its misuse. I thought I'd just add that in. You're very quiet. Do ask a question.
Misuse and abuse.